Good afternoon. Thank you for coming on a blustery day. Boy, have we had a long winter. Randy, I guess if it's up a little more? Okay, is that better? All right, thank you. My name is Jan Wilder, and on behalf of Bellevue Heights Church, I want to welcome you. I have been privileged to be a hospice volunteer for almost 10 years. Hard to believe that long. Throughout those years, I have had people ask me more about what hospice does. Thus, I felt it would be beneficial to have this forum today. I want to introduce you to these hospice experts. I met some of them for the first time. And first, I want to introduce my supervisor, Jeannie Gaskill. She's supervisor of volunteer program, so I'm under her. And Katie McKinley. She's post-acute alignment specialist in West Valley. And Jessica, is it Dugan or Duggan? Dugan. Dugan. She's a hospice social worker in West Valley, and we haven't seen each other for years. So it was nice to see her. At the conclusion of the forum, the audience will be able to ask questions from the Banner Hospice panel. Okay, I'm going to sit down. We'll move these things, and then we'll start. All right, y'all can hear? First question, and they all can see which one is the expert on it. I think you all are, though. When did hospice start in the United States, and what is hospice? So you two would use that.
Okay. Hospice really became Connecticut in the 70s, and then it became into the Medicare, government got funding through Medicare in like the 80s. So I did a diagram in your guys's of where, but it started out first by a chaplain in Connecticut who decided that he wanted to open a hospice with a doctor there.
And it evolved from there, huh? All
Yep.
over the United States and probably the world, right?
Well, it started more in England.
Oh.
There was a doctor in England who actually did research and started the philosophy more and opened more of the hospice philosophy there.
Okay, I'm learning. Believe me, I'm learning. Where is hospice located?
Everywhere.
Like?
There is no location, and that's the biggest thing that is hit, that it's a philosophy of care. There is, depending on where you're located in the United States, I've learned this, like my East Coast families, there is hospice residence, and you can pay to be in those residents or meet a criteria for a hospice to pay for you, but their philosophy of being taken care of where the person lives is the philosophy. So out here in Arizona, all the hospices basically have what we call inpatient status, and that's only for to make sure that the person's symptoms are taken care of, and that's very short term. So Medicare doesn't allow us to pay for any long-term care or a person's house or where the person lives.
I have visited people in their homes, in a nursing home, in a group home, We also have it in the hospital now, don't we? Which is a new thing since I've started. Is there a portion in the hospital of hospice, a wing or part of a wing?
Actually, it's certain units, like at Del Webb, it's 5C, which is the oncology unit that we've trained for hospice. We've trained at Boswell, a certain unit. It's at most of our hospitals. I think we're only like 2 of our hospitals, there's not the BHIP program. And usually those are patients that are already in the hospital, but are too critical or their symptoms are not being managed. Like someone's pain is so out of control that that could not be taken care of at home, or it's too dangerous for them to be taken that they would pass with transport to home.
And when I started, we had, inpatient facilities, and from what I understand, that's evolved over time where it's like in the hospital now, the patient's home, nursing home, group home. What is palliative care and what pain control do you use?
So with hospice, palliative care, I think of it as an umbrella. It's also a philosophy of care, and hospice is part of that philosophy. Palliative care is comfort, dignity, managing symptoms. It's not covered by Medicare. It's an extra service. We are advocating for it at the different hospitals. They are starting to have palliative care teams come in and help you, and most of those teams are looking at people who have chronic illness and having discussions about future plans, those things. There is some palliative teams out in the community. Most of the time it's just providing families emotional support and helping them, guide them through the chronic illness of that person. Very rarely they can provide any extra services. Like I said, not very many insurances are covering it, even though it would keep people out of the hospital. You can still go to the hospital, you can still go for curative, you can still pursue everything. It's just a philosophy of care of looking at your comfort and making sure your symptoms, and that you kind of have a plan about how you want your life to go on from there.
How about pain care? Is it just oral? And when I was with a patient, my last patient, she was just a gem. The caregiver had the medications for pain and would give it certain times and had, I guess, the ability from hospice to give it. And at times, I think she called the hotline to see if there was something else to help her. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So is it just oral, nothing, oral meds?
Yeah, usually it's liquid meds. We do tablets sometimes, depending. I do tell families that the oral medication does not taste good. That's the most complaints that we get. But it is oral medication. If it needs to be like what we call IV medication, that's when we have to look at inpatient status, because that has to be done by an RN. So that's what the difference is.
So then they would go to a hospital inpatient unit.
Or another facility that we would do inpatient, yes.
Okay. All right. I want to know what guidelines do you have for qualifying for hospice, like weight, mental, vitals, organs?
You can take that one. I actually have the code. You have the code? I have the book.
So qualifying for hospice is different for everybody. It's going to look different. The team is going to look at all of your symptoms, your diagnoses. They're going to look at your progress notes from your physicians. They're going to take everything into consideration to determine whether you qualify for hospice. There's not a specific weight or a specific vitals or anything with your organs. To qualify for hospice overall, there must be a terminal diagnosis. That does not mean that you're going to expire next month or the month after that. There's not a date to qualify for hospice, correct? And I think that's one of the biggest myths out there, is they think you have to be almost ready to expire before you can qualify for hospice.
How about, what are ADLs, and is that a factor in qualifying for hospice with everything else?
So ADLs are activities of daily living. That's everything you do daily, brushing your teeth, getting dressed, tying your shoes. That wouldn't necessarily be taken into account. Maybe your inability to do that, how difficult it's becoming, but that would have to be accompanied with the diagnosis as well. There are some hospice patients who qualify for hospice who can still brush their teeth, can still, get themselves dressed, though that's not a determining factor.
Okay. Why do you need volunteers, and what do they do, Jeannie?
So this is my area of expertise, and volunteers are a huge part of hospice. Hospice is one of the last parts of our healthcare system that's a holistic healthcare model. So Medicare actually mandates that we provide, not just Banner Hospice, but all hospices, provide 5% of all direct patient care hours to their patients via volunteers. So volunteers in hospice are officially a part of our medical team. It's a very unique type of volunteer position. It's very different than volunteering in the hospital, where you might have very limited one-on-one time with a patient. As a hospice volunteer, you are assigned to a patient just like a social worker might be, or a nurse might be, or a chaplain might be, because one of the field staff has gone out to that patient and they saw, hey, you know what, for this patient's quality of life, they need a volunteer for emotional support. It can be for just companionship. It can be for respite, short-term respite, and that's more caregiver support. So if anyone's ever been a caregiver, you know it's exhausting. And when you have a patient who the team has said this patient can't be left alone, it's not safe for them, then the caregiver may need respite. That's like 2 hours once a week. You come in and you give the caregiver a break. We also have people trained in pet therapy. We have volunteers who are trained in something called music and memory. It's for dementia patients who music helps dementia patients in a way that they might not be able to talk, but they can enjoy the music. We have volunteers, let's see what I'm forgetting. Oh, we have a bereavement. Are we going to talk about the bereavement program? I forget if that was a question.
We can right now if you want.
Okay. We have a bereavement program. It's one of our most underutilized services. All hospices are required by Medicare to provide 13 months of bereavement support to the family members of a person who died on hospice and to the community at large. So you don't have to be a Banner, you don't have to have had a loved one die on Banner Hospice to take part of their bereavement services. So we, for instance, have online bereavement groups that started since COVID. Before that, we had in-person, and we had a mixture of people who experienced a loved one's death on our hospice service, on somebody else's hospice service, just in the hospital, car accident, doesn't matter. If they have grief and they need support, they can come to Banner Hospice. We also have a bereavement camp for kids, because children grieve very differently than us adults. They need a more play-based experience, so we do weekends where the kids can come, and volunteers are vital in making that run because it's almost entirely run by volunteers. So we have a lot of volunteer hours in the bereavement program. And we have a lot of volunteer hours in the patient-facing program, and both are really needed. We also have volunteers in our administrative offices helping with things like creating our bereavement packets, creating our admission packets for new patients, doing our bereavement mailings, sometimes making phone calls to patients, kind of anything a staff can do. It's a really unique volunteer experience. We have amazing volunteers that think of their own creative ideas and the ways to spread about the word about hospice, and I can't imagine any volunteer who would do that, just what Jan is doing. But it is kind of a special area. A lot of people, just like a lot of the staff, volunteers often feel called to work with hospice from some grief or bereavement experience of their own, seeing a loved one die on hospice and they felt touched and they want to give back. We get a lot of staff like that too. Yeah, that's the volunteer program.
And you don't, when you go for respite, you're not providing care to the patient. I want to make sure you know you're not having to change them or do anything. If anything, you're giving them a glass of water. If the wife left them a sandwich, you're giving them a sandwich or something like that. You're watching TV with them. It's just making sure if something does happen, you call us, we answer, you know. It's just to make sure that person's not alone. It's not for you to provide care for that time period. I just want to make sure you guys knew that.
Right. I just wanted to mention some of the experiences I've had over the years. One lady had breast cancer and she had a stroke, and her husband was just a doll. He was the caregiver for her. She could hardly speak, and I was there to just relieve him, a little respite. Maybe every week or two he'd go out and grocery shop and get a haircut. And I had his number, so he would, know that everything's okay, and we would watch TV, and I would just gibber and jabber to her and tell her about this and that. And she was very intelligent. She just couldn't speak. And so I would kid the husband and say, well, I told her lots of secrets, but she won't tell you. And so we just had a great time and encouraged her to drink and so forth. And that was a real sweet relationship. The last patient I had, she was on hospice for 2 years and was just so, so delightful. I got to know her kids, her grandkids, who they were, and talk about it. And then I thought, gee, I asked her, would you like me to read you some chicken soup stories? And so I would look in the book and pick out some things that she would really like. And we had the best time and laughed. And so it was just a wonderful experience, and I still miss her. One other time I was visiting a lady who had a son periodically get her food and check on her, but he really wasn't around much. And she was older and had dementia. And so as a volunteer, is your eyes and ears. And so when I came numerous times, she had wet herself, her bed, and her clothes. And so I called their hotline and said, please send somebody out, a CNA today, to give her a shower, to put her clothes on. And she just wasn't eating right either. I was calling and documenting things. And finally, hospice persuaded the son to put her in nursing care, which was the right thing for her. So anyway, and I've also done administrative things, writing cards. That was years ago, to the bereaved, and also I was working with a bereavement coordinator at that time, and I would call people maybe 5 days or a week after they lost their loved one and just check on them, and then my supervisor was typing in all the data on the computer, so I did that also. So there were a variety of things that I have done. Any comments from you all? Okay. We're going to have some true and false questions now. If a person has dementia or Alzheimer's, he or she qualifies for hospice.
This is the one that, we have a medical director who likes to say depends. This is where the criteria comes in. Depending on where they're at with their dementia. So that's where we come in to evaluate, and we can help guide you of where we think they are at with the doctor. Usually it's more of the end stage, like they're not getting up to walk, they're incontinent, bladder and bowel, they're saying like 6 words or less, not really having lots of sentences, they're getting lots and lots of infections. That's sometimes where we really look at people with dementia going onto hospice.
Even if, let's say, they don't have heart trouble or cancer, could just be that it's so
Yes.
severe.
Yes.
Okay. I can continue medical treatments and prescription meds while on hospice.
We go through the list with you of what medication hospice will cover. Anything dealing with your diagnosis and comfort, hospice, Medicare allows hospice to cover. If it's a medication like for your thyroid, Medicare is not going to let us cover, but your other insurance will still cover it. So there's medications that hospice will pay for, and then your other insurance will pay too. If it's a medication that is with your diagnosis to try and help cure it, like a cancer drug or something like that, then yes, that would be discontinued.
Okay. That's what I was wondering. I can keep my primary doctor.
Yes, you can keep your primary care doctor. Sometimes the primary care doctor doesn't want to keep you. The reason being that our doctors are used to getting phone calls at 2 a.m. and they're instantly right there. So sometimes our primary care doctors say, yeah, Monday through Friday call us, but after hours, use your doctor for the after hours. But we do try and keep the primary care doctors, even if they're not following up to date on what's going on with the patient.
Hospice provides 24/7 caregivers to the patient.
No,
How come?
Medicare doesn't pay for it. We cannot provide 24-hour caregivers. We provide medical care. 24-hour caregivers are called custodial care. It's not medical care. So medical care, being an RN, can come in usually about twice a week, get your vitals, see how you're doing. Do we need to do any medication changes? How's your pain control? How you're peeing, pooping, those kind of things. Social worker comes in 2 to once a month to see how is things going in the home going. Chaplain comes in to help provide spiritual support. Then the CNA does come in and help with bathing support about twice a week to do a good bed bath and change out the sheets. So those are the things we can provide. We also provide a dietitian to help the family with any problems the person has with appetite. The dietitian can call and discuss any problems, those things.
They are available. They have a hotline, though, so if you ever needed anything in the meantime, you can call the hotline and speak with a hospice nurse.
And if it's something we can't handle by phone, a nurse would be sent out.
Yeah.
So we're available 24/7 to come and help with any medical issue.
That just answered my next question, which was, I can call hospice only during business hours, so they would have these numbers to call.
Yes.
Mhm. Hospice just helps the patient and not the family members. We kind of touched on that.
There's actually more psychosocial team members than there is nursing. So we're there for the whole family. And even the nurse is there to educate the family on what's going on with their loved one. So that's one thing I love about hospice compared to the other parts of the medical field that I've worked, is that it's not just the patient, it's the whole family is actually the patient. We get to treat the whole family.
which sometimes make interesting dynamics, I might add. There are grief groups, now they're online. They were in meeting before COVID together. I was with 2 spouses for a year, and we would go out to lunch and just see how, each other's doing. And so I did that aftercare for 2 people. And also I was at family camp too the one time, and that was interesting in Payson. I call 911 before hospice in an emergency.
No. When you sign on to hospice, you're basically saying you're not going to go back to the hospital. We're going to be the 911. We're supposed to be the one to help you through that emergency. So there is times that we tell the patient, call 911, because we know that they need that kind of, but we are the ones, Medicare will ask if we told them to go to the ER. Because if we don't tell the family it's okay, then the family could end up with the bill for the whole ER visit. So they have to get permission from us.
So let's say the patient falls, their concern may be a break. You would just say, call 911 once they contact you.
We would talk to the family and see if they want us to first have, some families just want the nurse to come out and look at it and see. And then we can also do x-rays at the house instead of having to sit there in the ER and wait for it. And then, because we can provide the pain control right there. And then we can discuss, is it something that can be fixed? And if it's something that can be fixed, then we discuss coming off of hospice to get it fixed, and then they can come back after it's fixed, after the rehab process. So you can get surgery when you're on hospice.
Okay. I can be on hospice and not have a DNR. What is a DNR?
Yes. The lovely orange form. And yes, you can actually be a full code and be on hospice. We do try and start educating families on what that means and the patient, but it is patient choice. And that's where I as the social worker go and start talking about, this is what would happen, this is what the process would be if you were for code. And so most of our 4 codes, people change to a do not resuscitate after a while. They just need time to process their diagnosis and what's going on with them.
Hospice can help me with a living trust and a medical POA, which is a medical power of attorney.
I'm not an attorney. I can help with a medical power of attorney, but I cannot do a living trust. That's a lawyer. I can do a living will, and I can do a medical power of attorney. So I can help with those advanced
So you
directives.
have the paperwork for
Yes.
that. So you're the one who works with the patient.
And the family,
Social
yes.
work.
Yeah.
Okay. Hospice is available for persons 65 years old and older.
I actually had a 21-year-old as a patient, so it doesn't matter what age you are.
At the bereavement camp where I was at, 2 families lost their teenager girls. And it's so hard. I was just encouraging them. They were wonderful people, and the whole family came, the siblings, the mother and the father. A person can only be on hospice for 6 months. I answered that some, but do they check them after 6 months to see if they qualify?
Actually, after 3 months, we start checking. The doctor has to review the patient's information. We have to see, is the person actually declining? Is there enough proof that the patient's declining for us to continue hospice? And then we do another check 3 months after that, and then every 2 months after that, we do check. and see is the patient declining. There is a very strict criteria for someone to keep on qualifying for hospice. But yes, I have had patients on for 2 years too.
So does a nurse check the person initially? Does the doctor show up? How does that work initially when they begin?
First, we need a doctor's order to say that the doctor states that the person's terminally ill, and then a nurse evaluates and talks to our medical doctor about it. And then after that, the 3 months we review with the doctor by phone, and then in person, 6 months, a nurse practitioner comes out. And then after that, every 2 months, the nurse practitioner comes out. But if at any time anyone wants to see the nurse practitioner or doctor, we can always have them come and visit. It doesn't have to be at those designated times.
Okay. Well, we answered some of this. Only the doctor, RN, and CNA see the patient. What are all the moving parts?
Volunteer, which I depend on. And then we have chaplain, we have the social worker, we have dietitian, and we're also very lucky to have physical therapy since we're part of the Banner Home Care. If we need to teach a family how to do a transfer correctly or do some exercises, we can have a physical therapist also come out just to do some education too.
See, I'm learning today. Also, a music therapist, that was a big deal. My lady who was in hospice 2 years. Every week, or every other week, I can't remember, the music therapist would come out, and she had a guitar, and they asked the person what's their favorite, if they like hymns or gospel or country or whatever, and she would play music for her. And what my lady did, she invited her great-grandkids to come that day, and it was a special family time to be with Gigi. That's what they called her, and it was really a special time. Also, you may have a pastor, a rabbi, a priest, and they can visit you. Some people don't have that connection, but they want the chaplain, so the chaplain can come out. And I know with different patients, the chaplain, depending on their religious affiliation, would give them last rites or communion or pray with them or whatever. So it's, I think, a holistic thing, don't you think, with everything involved?
Jan, just one second. With music therapists, just so you guys know, music therapy is just not someone just playing music. It's a trained therapist. So she is doing actual therapy with that person, trained on how. I've had patients who are breathing really, really fast, and she can go in and analyze everything and start playing music slowly and get that breathing very slow and peaceful. She can help them with if they're having depression, those kind of things. Our music therapy is through a grant right now. So, and also part of that grant was they were able to get a stethoscope, and they can record the person's heartbeat and then put it towards music. So that way that family member can forever have their loved one's heartbeat with music.
Never knew that. Are there any other comments from the panel here of maybe what we missed or?
One of my personal missions is to encourage people to think about, if they have a loved one who qualifies for hospice, getting on hospice on time. Even in the medical field, doctors and nurses don't want to say to someone, you might want to think about hospice. It's such a hard mental transition. And I've trained in the bereavement role, I've trained in the chaplain role, so I've been on lots of those sides of conversations with families, and I think I think those among us who die on hospice with enough months are lucky, because we can say goodbye to loved ones. that loved one can have time to process what's happening to them. If they're able, they can be in they have more choice about their last months on this earth, how important is that? And we give people so much time to prepare for birth. And part of the hospice movement is giving people time to prepare to end their life. But unfortunately, too many people get on hospice for a day or a week. And that is better than not, because they can be comfortable in those last minutes, but it doesn't utilize really what the heart of hospice is, which is to live while you're dying and to allow family members to kind of finish any open business, say goodbyes. It helps the grieving process for the people who are left behind so much, because they don't have the what ifs and the I wish I could have. And they have trained staff to help make those jumps in consciousness that we don't want to face, because nobody likes to face death. So I invite everybody here to be a little bit of an ambassador for hospice in your own way. I know it's hard when it comes to our own personal life, even when, I become a different person. I've had family members at that decision, and it's just, when it's you personally, it's so hard. So that's why it's good to rely on the hospice team. So thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
One more thing I want to add is the referral to hospice does not have to come from your doctor. It can come from any of you. Were you going to ask that? Yes. So if you call into the hospice and you make a referral, we'll reach out to them and we'll talk with them. And if we determine that they're appropriate, we can reach out to the doctor and get the order. So any of you are empowered to make a referral, whether it's yourself, a friend, your spouse, anything of that nature. So I think that's a big deal as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for making that.
Sure.
I wanted to say, it reminded me, we do have people, so if someone's in doubt, we do have people, as Jessica was explaining, every 3 months, they have to pass to stay on hospice. So we have people get discharged for what they call it extended prognosis, basically meaning they're not ill enough to be on hospice anymore. So if somebody can cross that barrier on time, they might fail hospice, they might get kicked out, and then they can come back on later. But at least they tried to have that time, because nobody really knows what's going to happen. Yeah.
With that, a lot of times our patients come home from the hospital and then they get home and they get better. People can't, well, everyone knows what the hospital's like. Home's better. Also, if you make the decision of going on hospice, some people are like, oh, I made this decision, I can't go back on my decision. No. You always have the right to say, I don't want hospice anymore. It's not the philosophy I want. I want to start doing this, this, and this. And we back 100%. And that's what I want you to know. It's your choice. It's patient choice. No one's telling.
Great points. Now from the audience, does anybody have a question for the panel? Go ahead, Roger.
You've talked mainly about hospice care for patients that are at home or somewhere else. What about the patients that need to be in hospice care for IVs or something like that? What's the status?
Usually that's what we call inpatient status, and that's usually very short term. And that's usually, because Medicare states if they're on IV medication and pain medication, that we should be trying to get them off of the IV medication and getting them on something to make sure they can go where they live, that they don't want people dying in facilities. They want the person dying where they live. They don't want them in an inpatient status.
So you do provide hospice care for those in hospital?
Yeah.
And who pays for that?
Medicare, but like I said, it's very short term, 3 to 5 days. It's usually what we're trying to do. If we are going past that, a person's in so much pain that we're going past 5 days, that's not a good thing. We want to get the pain under control. We want to get that symptoms managed. We want that person as comfortable as possible as fast as we can to get them where they live.
Are all hospices equal?
All hospices follow.
Hospice in the Valley and these other different hospice organizations, are they different or the same?
They're different and same. We all have to follow the same guidelines. Some of us have different programs. Some have, like Hospice of the Valley does still have their inpatient residents. But they have to follow the same criteria that their residents, that the person goes in there, it has to be short-term. And if you stay past meeting that criteria, they then start charging you for like a private pay status. So that's what, we have to follow the same guidelines. That's what I'm trying to emphasize.
And to speak to that a little bit more, Banner does have contracts with a lot of the facilities throughout the valley. So a lot of the skilled nursing facilities that you guys are probably familiar with. I think right around here we have Peoria Post-Acute, Sierra Winds, Grandview. Banner Hospice has contracts with them. So if we have a patient at home and they need a little bit more support, something is going on, we can send them to these facilities and we have that bed. And we can provide the IV medications. There's a nurse 24 hours a day. But with all of the hospices, anything inpatient is going to be short term. There's no facility out there that can take a patient for 3 or 4 months on hospice, unless it's at a facility and they're a long-term resident there already. So sometimes you have like the long-term care facilities, and a patient can be there and then go on to hospice. And then at that point, they will be at that facility under our hospice. So we'll have our nurses coming in just as they would if it was at home. But in the meantime, they would still have their staff there that they had previously. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about supportive care for dementia and Alzheimer's, where pain is not a major consideration?
Social work? That might be under her. I know that with our dementia patients, again, that's something that they kind of will evaluate that patient and their family individually and kind of build a care plan around that. We do rope in, so music therapy, just like she was saying, it makes connections in your brain that, a medication or something like that wouldn't help with. Sometimes for those dementia patients who are no longer able to speak, it will, and they have studies showing this where they've done imaging with the music going, you'll start to see different parts of your brain firing, different memories maybe are being unlocked. It evokes different kinds of feelings in these patients. So that is really big with our dementia patients. We do have the caretakers who will come in and provide the respite for the family because it's a lot when you're dealing with that.
Also, unfortunately with dementia, it changes personality, and sometimes behaviors happen, like not sleeping at night, getting up constantly. Then we work with the family of, do we need to change some medications? Do we need to come up with a routine? Like I was just talking to a family, and they were like, oh, he's getting up at night to have oatmeal at this time. And I'm like, okay, is this a new behavior? And they're like, oh, he started that about 5 years ago. So it's going back and looking at what happened before and how things are now. But we do have medications also to help with any behaviors that might come up, too. And we also provide what's called respite care. So under the Medicare benefit, we can provide 5 nights in one of the facilities we're contracted in, so that way family can have a break as a caregiver. And it's one of the most not used. I try and emphasize, and we're so excited because Katie's worked her miracle and got one that's actually a memory locked unit. So because a lot of times some of it, those patients are wanderers and the family's having to keep their eyes on them constantly. If they're on hospice, now I have a place to say to the family, you can have 5 nights without worrying about it. And I can offer you that almost monthly to have a break, or you could go on vacation. And so that is one way we can help the family also to take those breaks. Having a volunteer come and sit, having the music therapist, those kind of things.
I have visited people who had dementia, and you don't know what triggers it. I mean, you can talk to them. Sometimes I would have a magazine like Reminisce or Country or something, and flip through and talk some. Also, I think the pet therapy, that really awakens a person and does wonders.
We do have one, but like I said, we don't, sorry. Memory care units, most of them are labeled under assistive livings, and that doesn't meet the criteria for us to be contracted to provide the respite care. But if a person, like I've had loved ones at Pacifica, which is a memory care unit, and they're living there long term, and then we have hospice go in to have an extra benefit of an extra set of eyes, an extra set of people coming in to check on the medications, those kind of things. So wherever that person is, we can go in. We don't have to have a contract really to go see them if they're living there.
But we do have now a facility we can send
For
the
respite.
patients to that is locked memory care, and it's for a respite, or if they need it for those 5 days, if they need to go inpatient for a little bit. We do have a brand new, beautiful facility that we've just got the contract for. It's Diamondback Healthcare.
Yes.
I got a short question. Your logo says Banner in the blue, looks like Banner Hospital. Are you connected?
Yes. We're part of the Banner Hospital system.
Okay. I have a question. My mother had a stroke. She was 95. She was in a nursing home, and they supposed to check doing night watches, but we know that they didn't do it. And when she went into the hospital, hospice was involved, but they, for 6 days, gave her morphine, and she was in no pain, not whimpering one bit. I question, does that actually delay her passing?
Well,
Because she was in no pain whatsoever.
where one, I want to educate, morphine can be used for something else too. And so with our patients that have strokes, sometimes they have breathing issues. So a lot of times we use the morphine also for those who are having breathing difficulties. So I don't know the specifics with your loved one, but that's what morphine doesn't delay someone passing. It doesn't speed up the process. It just makes the person comfortable.
Number two, to like a PS to that, I am highly allergic to morphine. And my surgeon told me, he says, well, if that's the case, you're under hospice care, have them give you a shot and get it over with.
And we won't do that.
Yeah. Oh, my.
Unless that's your choice, but no, they still wouldn't do that.
We have other pain. Yeah.
We had a good rapport, so I mean, if he talked to some other patient like that, he probably couldn't get away with it, but he said, if that's your situation, just get the shot, get it over with.
Well, just so you know, we do not just do morphine. We have other pain medications. So, and you're not alone. Sometimes I'm amazed with the allergies, but we do look at that to make sure that we're not going to cause any discomfort to people.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Now, just for you ladies alone. Just for you ladies alone, I was just curious as to what your specialty was. Are you all social workers, or are you nurses,
I'll go first. So I am a post-acute alignment specialist. I fall under business development within Banner, and I am a specialist over our hospice, our DME, our home health, and our home infusion. So I am a resource. Maybe a liaison would be an easier way to understand it, but I do a lot of the provider relations with our doctors and our accounts and our clinics and our hospitals all in the West Valley. I do a lot of educations on what Banner Post-Acute can provide. We are the only agency in all of the Valley that can do all four. So a lot of times when our patients are inside of our Banner hospitals, and they come onto Banner Home Health, or they need any kind of DME or hospice, we all have access to the same charts. So it's a really easy transition. The providers can reach out to me directly if they want any updates or anything, like your PCP. If you decided to go on hospice and our medical director is now following for you, your PCP might reach out to me directly through the medical chart or through our Banner email. Anything like that. I'm also a contact for a lot of our patients on any of those four service lines. So since we are the biggest, a lot of times it's easier to have one person to contact rather than calling intake and waiting on hold for 20 minutes, 40 minutes. Yes.
And what is DME?
Medical equipment.
Durable medical equipment. So it's your walkers, wheelchairs, beds, stuff like that.
And I'm a social worker.
Yeah, I'm actually trained in social work and also ministry, so I did chaplaincy social worker, but right now I'm doing administrative role.
Besides the durable equipment, what supplies does hospice provide?
We provide, so when you go home, we'll provide a hospital bed, we'll provide oxygen, wheelchair. We don't have to prove to Medicare that you need it. We just write the order and we get it. We'll provide any incontinence, so any Depends, diapers, any what we call chucks, gloves, any creams that you need to protect your skin. We provide those. We even provide sometimes special shampoos if you're allergic to certain ones. So those kind of personal care stuff we can help provide,
Yeah,
which
that's
saves
one.
some families a lot of money.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
I could just make some comments. I've been around since the beginning of hospice and remember when it all was getting started. And I was interested in the comment about, what's it, 15% or 5%
5%.
needed to be volunteer. When did that happen?
I actually don't know when. Somewhere in the Medicare mandate, but the reason behind it is it's cost saving, but also to keep with the original heart of hospice, which was community based. So it's like a way to administer a community based care if you have your neighbors going into each other's homes.
The other thing that's interesting is the big push way back then was to get physicians to order hospice, and it's still a problem.
It's still a problem. It's still a problem, yeah. When I worked in the hospital, sometimes I would see a doctor go right up to the line, but not cross it to say it. Like, come on, say it, one more.
Sometimes they just have difficulty. Sometimes a lot of the providers, what we've seen is they just have difficulty having that conversation. It makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to upset their patient, so they would just rather, somebody else to do it. So a lot of times that's the issue with them writing the order. So when I have a provider who is kind of like that and tends to not write the orders, I let them know, you can reach out to me. I'm more than welcome to have these conversations if they're open to learning a little bit about it, and they don't have to have an order for it. So that's another way that we've kind of combated that. But yes, it's difficult to get orders on anything with physicians.
And
That's it.
That's incredible. So to speak to that as well, if we ever have a patient who's in the hospital and something happened and they've declined and now they're hospice appropriate, but they can't go home, our hospice will work with the patient and find them somewhere to go, like a group home or somewhere like that, for long term. So it doesn't always have to be home or nothing, because a lot of us don't have somebody at home. We don't have a caregiver in between the nurse's visits or the CNA. So we will help them. We may do that inpatient stay right after the hospital to get them out of the hospital. So they'll go to one of our contracted facilities for a couple days, and we'll take care of their transition to a permanent home after that.
No, Royal Oaks isn't contracted with Medicare, so we can't contract with them.
I'm glad you knew that.
Any other comments?
That's a Medicare requirement of all hospices. Right now, there's been a waiver with the pandemic that's set to expire soon, but in general, yes, all hospices across the board need to have volunteers and show that they're at least working towards providing 5% of direct patient care hours. So you add up the hours every month that were provided by all of the patient-facing staff and take 5% of that number, and it should equal the amount of numbers that volunteers provided.
Yes.
Yeah, it can be hard to get. It depends. Like right now it's hard. Before, and it depends on how many volunteer management staff you have, and when you onboard as a volunteer for hospice, you're onboard just like equivalent to how a nurse or a chaplain would, because you're considered official staff. You're going into a dying stranger's home, so it's very sensitive. So you have to jump through all the hoops. So it's hard to onboard, and then it's hard to get people. But once we get people, they normally stay for a long time, like 10 years and more. But yeah, we do have that. We have to show at least that you're working towards it. Well, it's changed a bit since we can't meet in person. We don't meet in person as much, but the first step, there's a flyer out there if anyone's interested. My email is there. So the first step is to apply. There's an application, and then there's a phone call we have where I explain all of the steps. The steps include some reading training, visiting our Banner Occupational Health and getting cleared with the requirements they have for vaccines and for TB testing, and then getting what's called a fingerprint clearance card, which is something that all people who work with vulnerable populations have: foster parents, people who work with geriatrics, teachers. And then there is a training, one-on-one training, where you meet with me and other volunteers if we start to pick up again faster, and we go through what you read in the manual. Then normally your first visit is with another person, either a staff member or another volunteer. And excuse me, after that, it depends on the volunteer's comfort. We have a lot of retired healthcare people, so they're very comfortable. And then we have people who have zero experience with healthcare, and they normally like to shadow more or have someone go with them. Some people like to only do group settings. They're not comfortable in private homes. So it depends a little bit on what the volunteer is interested in. We do, yeah. All Banner staff have to have two COVID shots. The first two, yeah. And yes, no, we can't have staff, yeah. I have no idea.
Yes, go ahead.
How do you deal with the situation if the family patient has animals to be taken care of?
For volunteers or for the patients, like?
Anybody. I got 2 dogs. It's my primary thing in my life.
Me too. Well, I would say we kind of
I have experienced something like this before in a different role within Banner. When I was in the acute side, when I was working downtown at university, um, I used to work on the pulmonary floor, and we did have a patient who came in, determined they were more appropriate for hospice, and they were not able to go back home, and they did have little puppies at home. We got our social work involved at the hospital, but what we did is we ended up contacting an animal rescue. And the animal rescue ultimately came in and they did take possession of those dogs. But before that, the social work reached out to family and friends of that patient to see if any of them could take those dogs per the wish of the patient. So they tried to do what they could, which, you know, by the patient's request. Ultimately, it didn't happen, so they ended up going to an animal rescue. Yeah, they will go above and beyond and do as much as they possibly can. And that's okay, too.
In Mesa, we have a story. One of our social workers had a patient who died and had a little dog. The husband, who was the survivor, didn't want really the little dog that much, but there was another hospice patient who was a very elderly woman who lived by herself, had lots of issues, but still safe enough to live by herself and wanted to stay there, but was lonely and loved dogs. So the husband said, let her have this dog until she dies, and I'll take the dog back. So that hospice patient took the other hospice patients who had already died's dog, and that dog kept her company until the end of her life. So that dog was a little hospice nurse.
I want to add, I have friends, actually it's the mother, the father, and the adult son. And at times, all three would help the son. And one particular patient I'm thinking of, they had a dog. So he walked the dog. They weren't scared of animals. And then they needed landscaping. So JW was out there pulling weeds. So all three of them are now hospice volunteers, and they've been hospice volunteers for about 20 years. And that's how I found out about hospice, was through this dear friend. I also forgot to say, like with a volunteer, with the last lady I had, she was so dear, and at times she just said, Jan, I just want to go home, and meaning the Lord. Sometimes it's just easier to talk to another person about how they feel versus the family. And there's no judgment, and so there's an openness, which really, I think, relieves the patient, that they can talk and that you have some type of understanding. Is that it? I want to thank first the panel. Some of them came from the east side, so thank all of you. It's good getting to know the new ones that I haven't met. And I want to thank you for coming today. So thank you, and have a safe trip home. God bless.
I'm thankful for Jessica. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I wish Lisa could have made it because she's got so much to say too.
I've learned from you all. So.
Absolutely.
You go ahead before me. You can go down before me.